The central bank governor, Olayemi Cardoso, has come up with policies to curb inflation and promote economic growth. And that will be the focus of our discussion this morning. We have in the studio Dr. Tefa Abraham. He is an economist, and we're also expecting Mukhtar to join us shortly as well to talk about this new drive by the federal government. Thank you so much for joining us on Daybreak this morning, Dr.
My pleasure
Tefa.
to be here. Thank you.
All right. Well, this is quite ambitious. Listening to the central bank governor talks about this government's, plan or vision to increase Nigeria's economy to a $1 trillion economy in the next 3 years. That's 2026. And I'm wondering, how realistic is this? We're talking about 150% jump, and with the current realities, inflation, unemployment, and so on. How realistic is this, to increase this economy from a $400 billion economy to $1 trillion in 3 years?
Well, first of all, that goal is ambitious, and there's nothing wrong for anybody being ambitious. But the reality on ground is that the monetary policy angle of the management of the economy, doing that alone is something that needs to be reshaped, and the monetary policy institution, that the central bank, needs to engage other sectors to achieve that. Now, that speech by the CBN governor was anticipated because it would be his first speech since CBN governor, aside the one he made in other quarters, in a professional setting. So there was a lot of anticipation regarding people understanding the direction of the monetary policy under the new CBN governor, Olayemi Cardoso. Now, generally, there's a limit to what monetary policy can do. And for me, that speech was really blown out of too much proportion. Monetary policy works together with fiscal policy, income redistribution policy, and other interventionist policy of the government. And central bank is the apex bank. Central bank policy works through commercial banks. So the impact of central bank on the economy is through commercial banks. So speaking to this Chartered Institute of Bankers of Nigeria was a good one, but the best monetary policy can do is to ensure that commercial banks, the banking system in general, become more people-focused, because through these banks, monetary policy transmits its impact to the people. So I expected the central bank governor to emphasize why banks should give loans to people at very reduced interest rates, why banks should deepen financial inclusion, why banks should ensure that they have branches in hard-to-reach areas, and underserved populations have access to banking services. They're able to take up mobile money accounts and have access to banking products, because the impact of central bank policy on the economy is as good as how many people are using the banking system. The experience in the last 3 years does not show that people have confidence in the banking system, where people could not access. Even right now, there's a seeming impression of cash crunch. You go to POS, you want a certain amount, they give you less. You want a certain amount, they give you less. These experiences of people cannot be pushed out overnight. So why that CBN governor's speech was nice in terms of giving the corporate world in the banking space that confidence, there was need for that speech to deepen more regarding how CBN under Olayemi Cardoso will achieve its target of price stability. The speech said monetary policy will focus on price stability, but it did not say how. It's important to trickle these things down. So that leap from monetary policy to $1 trillion economy does not work out in monetary policy equation. Central bank policy works on the economy through the quantity theory of money, the velocity of money transmitting its impact to price and quantity. So how CBN will move from turning the Nigerian economy to 1 trillion is something that I'm not saying it's not possible, but it's not something the CBN can do alone. It's something that they need to partner with microfinance, every sector, to ensure that the banks deepen access.
In that breath, then it makes sense that the central bank governor is, stating that there's a plan to ask commercial banks to increase their capital base, isn't it? So that they can be able to fund this $1 trillion.
Increasing the capital base. What makes us economists, aside studying BSc, MSc, PhD economics, is the ability to have published research right about the economy in totality from all the principles that we were disciplined from undergraduate to master's to PhD, using our thinking, our philosophy, our graphs, our theories, then our empirical data that we use to validate economic theory. We are not just economists on air because it's media that tied to economists. We are disciplined economists. We are trained. We are members of the Nigerian Economic Society. I'm saying that the approach of bankers heading CBN is what is giving the current governor of CBN this perspective of banks just increasing capital base. Study the history of bank capitalization. The history of increasing banking capitalization is to avert issue of banks failing. Once upon a time, Nigeria had like more than 90 banks. These banks some were mushroom collapsing, depositors' funds just being trapped, investors losing out. Although investors are always allowed to face the risks on their own, but depositors are to be protected through the NDIC. Savannah Bank, many of those banks crashed. So there was need to recapitalize so that banks that are not strong enough can come together and have that strong force. So they reduced from 20 to 25, and then the banks became stronger. And Nigerian banks, they are amongst the 1,000 banks in the world. But today, the economics for pushing for this capitalization does not rhyme with the tempo of the Nigerian economy. Look at our recent GDP figures. Services sector, for which banks belong, is the one that's driving GDP growth. Amidst poverty, amidst inflation, amidst unemployment, services sector, banks combined with telecoms, ICT are the ones driving the economy. Banks' profit after tax is in billions of naira. Why not come up with something that will make banks give back to their own system, and then to ensure that banks are stronger? But
so in essence, you're saying that the banks are not ready for this kind of recapitalization or increase in the capital base? Is that what you're saying?
For me, from a regression perspective, looking at the history of banking capitalization, asking banks to recapitalize now because of exchange rate instability, because of inflation rate instability, may not be appropriate, or may not be as easy as the CBN governor might have thrown out there.
Okay, just hold your thoughts. Yes. Yeah, hold your thoughts. We'll take a short breather now, and then when we return, the conversation will continue.
Human beings know what is right. If they don't want to do what is right, they will give you 1,001 reasons why they are doing the wrong things.
They see themselves as conquerors, and other people have been conquered.
When the opposition and the press keep parroting that phrase, government has failed, but we will not be here, hold on, we will not be here, sitting down here, if government has failed.
There has been almost total collapse of the security outfit, and the terrorists are taking advantage of this.
On that, a country that has about 923 square kilometers of arable land, not more than 2.5% has been cultivated.
Of course, you, the Nigerian citizen, will also have your say via our phone-in numbers on your screen.
The issue of appointment in Nigeria has become more political than doing the right thing for the country.
Welcome back to Daybreak on Trust Television, and we're talking about the Nigerian Central Bank tightening policy to curb inflation and also ask banks to boost their capital. And we have in the studio, before we went on the break, Tefa Abraham. He is an economist, but also we have been joined now by Mukhtar Mohammed, who is a financial analyst, to dive into this topic properly. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Okay, so first of all, I would ask you, Mukhtar, what is your take on these new policies by the central bank, the governor of the central bank?
I think it's a good policy if you look at the long-term prospect. But again, he's talking about all these policies driven towards 1 trillion naira economy. The government should be telling us, putting up what I call, would see the government setting the pace in terms of fiscal policies on how to achieve the 1 trillion naira economy. Our monetary policy alone cannot achieve the 1 trillion naira economy. And concentrating on the banks cannot achieve the 1 trillion naira economy, because when you look at, $1 trillion, and when you look at the banks, you realize that it will be like more or less that the second tier banks will be swallowed, because the first tier bank are above 1 trillion in terms of liquidity, in terms of expansion, in terms, some of them did the profit of 1 trillion last year, as Access Bank. So it's more or less like you are coming up with a policy, you are not looking at your productive sector. The productive sector should be what would drive the 1 trillion naira economy, $1 trillion economy. And I don't think the CBN should be telling us we want to start the 1 trillion now. Why we are looking for stability. Stability is key before you begin to drive towards achieving your 1 trillion. You have not been able to keep stability, especially microeconomic stability or monetary stability in terms of exchange rate volatility. And then you are thinking of what you think is most important now is to drive $1 trillion economy. It's good policy. Like we always say, we are not developed policy in Nigeria. Timing. What structure does the government have on ground
perhaps we should
to drive it 1 trillion?
Yes, perhaps we should also ask that what will it take really to achieve this target? I asked Dr. Tefa as well. There are some economies that say that, well, for us to really achieve this, it means 50% growth annually from now to 2026, which is the target, 3 years only. So what will be needed to make this happen, this 1 trillion target? Is it feasible?
Number one, we need to have this infrastructure, physical infrastructure. It's key. You don't have power, you want to drive a $1 trillion economy, it's going to be a mirage. Your transportation sector is still struggling, it's going to be a mirage. The human capital is still struggling because a lot of youths finish school, no employment. How do you drive $1 trillion economy without looking at your physical infrastructure and your human capital? Those are the key drivers of any economy. So if you say you want to drive a $1 trillion economy, you need to build your infrastructure. And you know that to build infrastructure now, by then they say we need over $1 trillion to build the infrastructure alone. So, and you said it's a 7 years plan.
Perhaps the president is, the CBN governor is saying this from the place of the recent engagement that the president has had with some of the foreign investors in his travels, in Saudi, in Germany and all that. We've heard some promises made, some agreements reached and so on. Do you think that this will, help to meet this in terms of having those investments that will make that happen?
The president has the right to even promise us a $2 trillion economy. He's the president. He sees things from the overall perspective, from federal, state, local government. He sees from a multi-sector perspective. But the CBN governor should be a technical person that speaks on monetary policy. That speech by the CBN governor, just throwing $1 trillion economy to Nigerians without explaining how monetary policy will achieve that. Remember, we are coming from an Emefiele era where bankers headed the CBN. And Olayemi Cardoso is a replica of that. So what in the international economy, international players are looking out for? The pulse, the rational expectation from investors, consumers, and government agents, national and global, and what they are looking out for is whether Olayemi Cardoso's regime will follow the pattern of Emefiele. Now, the moment they came in and floated the naira and all that, that was a positive sign for the international economy. But the CBN governor announcing a $1 trillion economy without narrowing it down to the role of monetary policy in that regard, looks as though the CBN will become an interventionist bank again in this regime. Monetary policy, economics, working with monetary policy is based on rational expectation. Once policymakers make this policy statement, economic agents, consumers, investors, and even government, local and state, pick the signal that they can pick. Now, $1 trillion economy, and then the goal of monetary policy is to achieve full employment, is to achieve exchange rate stability, price stability, and balance of payment, favorable position. Now, look at our balance of payment, proxy it with the foreign reserve. It's very weak. Exchange rate is not stable at all. Inflation is double digit and above. Growth is crippling. Now, 4 objectives, we are not doing good in 3. How can CBN alone, just imagine a house sliding down the hill and the CBN is trying to hold it down. So I'm not saying that that statement was was not proper. It's good to signal how people should be committed to a national objective. But CBN governor, not a representative of the CBN, should tell us how monetary policy will play the role it will play in that regard. Major statements that some of us who are economists, academics and policy economists follow that speech. We did not hear some things like, under this administration, monetary policy will be tight in the first 2 years and become expansionary in the next 1 year. These are the things that signal monetary policy from a central bank that is core in the business of central bank. This monetary policy, like I said earlier, works through commercial banks. Now, if the central bank governor is saying that banks will recapitalize, what that means is that you are asking banks to get more money in their reserves so that they will look more healthy. And I am saying that banks are already driving our GDP growth. And if you ask banks to recapitalize right now, you might just cause another round of panic in the banking system.
I think it's a good place to also ask the question that, Mukhtar, that what are the risks that we face in the banking sector if you push the banks to go this direction?
Well, you need to look back. I think when Tulude came with the $25 billion then, 25 billion naira, everybody said, wow, bank can no more. Our bank would never go under. Oh, we have steady. They had so much money. And at that time, they started investing foreign, Dubai, everywhere. They were all over the place, roadshow and everything. At the end of the day, what happened? Because you're just thinking of $1 trillion economy. You're not looking at human capacity. Can the bank withstand $1 trillion economy as it stands? You say recapitalization is just one. It's just one. So you're just concentrating, like he said, you're just concentrating on recapitalization. You are telling the banks, yes, the financial sector should drive the economy. Fantastic, which is done all over the world. Because in terms of, you want to look at capital, you want to look at funding, fine. But again, how efficient is the productive sector to assess those funds and be able to use these judiciaries and be able to pay back? Remember during the 25 billion, when we had the oil boom, and the bank were just lending to a lot of people that were into oil and gas businesses. At the end of the day, when there was that international shock, almost all the banks were collapsing. Because, you have so much fun. And they are telling you, you need to grow the economy. You need to grow the economy. We need to look at capacity. What is our strength? Like he's saying, what's our strength? You don't come up with monetary policy, and there was a CBN that was supposed to be meeting a monetary policy meeting. And then the director of communication said, all road now leads to the Chartered Institute of Banking. I mean, like, if the Chartered Institute of Banking now is not the major deciding formula of Nigeria economy, that's where the CBN governor chooses.
The CBN governor believes that the banks have passed the stress test, if I may take
you see, the liquidity ratio of the bank is even above international standards. That's what I'm saying. If he's talking about the liquidity ratio of the bank is huge. If he's talking about, maybe he's talking about tier 2 banks. And like I said, what will happen eventually is the big bank will swallow the smaller banks. And the smaller banks are where the SMEs get funds in easy. Because the big banks are always wanting to play with the big players.
Indeed. All right, Mukhtar, let's talk about the sectors that need to, put in their own contribution in order to achieve this dream that the CBN governor has. I mean, earlier, Dr. Tefa made mention of the fact that the CBN are putting themselves in a place where they will not be able to achieve this goal by themselves. So what sector do they need to approach, and how can they actually join hands in order to get these things done?
Unfortunately for the CBN, they can only be monetary. And the sector they can approach, that's the sector they are not trying to deal with. That is the banking space. You can't achieve a 1 trillion economy without a fiscal policy. We need to see the government fiscal policies towards a $1 trillion economy. You see what happened in the Mephiles time was that we saw a CBN that was driving monetary policy, and at a point the CBN saw an executive that were not available to drive the fiscal policy, and they got themselves into the fiscal side. They started doing direct lending, they started intervening, they started doing direct intervention. What should be driven by the fiscal side? And that is why we are in the mess that we are today. Now, I like the word you use, dream. It's a dream, it's a big dream. And he said in the next 7 years. Fantastic, but like he said, let him come and give us specifics. In the next 1 year, this is what we achieved towards the $1 trillion economy. In the next 2 years, that's what I should be expecting from him. He has come up with a larger 40-page policy document that I have not been able to digest. I've not finished reading it. I've been going through it. But again, the point is, your colleague talked about the international trip of Mr. President. What has he achieved? It has achieved confusion. As far as I'm concerned. You come out in Dubai, Emirates said they will start flying immediately. We are still waiting. They came out and said, no, we are still waiting. Tomorrow the Minister of Aviation is telling us they will soon be back. This is the same thing that happened. The core reason why Emirates is not coming to Nigeria was their funds are trapped. You did not address the fund trapping, then you say they will come back immediately to fly. That's one. The president has traveled to Saudi Arabia.
Has started, releasing those funds.
No, the CBN is releasing funds to banks, international banks. I don't think they've touched the aviation sector, yes. And like he said, if you look at our forward payment, we look at our reserve, we look at what we are owing, we look at what we are supposed to pay, by the CBN audited report, we have less than $3 billion as Nigeria.
Okay, now, there are certain issues, like you mentioned, on the physical side, of course, that need to be addressed. For instance, this morning we have a lead story here that is talking about 5.6 billion naira wheat project scam. Investigation was done by Daily Trust, where we understand that ex-Nisal boss was arrested 11 months after his sacking, and based on allegations of certain allegations of money that was meant to go into government intervention in agricultural sector that was, misappropriated and so on. The issue of corruption, how much of a problem is it in terms of addressing the physical side of, seeing this economic growth?
Let's be clear about corruption. Corruption can only be dealt with systems, cannot be dealt by strong men. What we've seen being addressed here is that strong men, when you have a strong man at the helm of affair, everybody sit up. You need to build structures. There's no economy in the world that does not have one measure of corrupt activities or the other. But when corruption is now embedded in your most, virtually every aspect of your economy, it's a big problem. And the only way you can deal with corruption is have a structure that will empower somebody. These corruptions are not perpetuated by one man. It has to pass through processes. So you need to make those processes as open as possible. Now, that is where we come about structural reforms in the civil service. How can one man be able to steal 5-point-something billion? How did it happen? He took advantage of the system. So when you're talking about fighting corruption, you should talk about bringing a system that is difficult, and the only way you can do that is digitize it. Make it digital. Let's be able to come out and make your operation open. You saw what happened in Lagos State, where they went to the procurement saying, oh, we are going to proclaim this and that. And the government said, oh, it was a typographical error. It's not true. We are not spending. Those are the type of things that you make it open and people begin to question it. So for me, dealing with corruption has become like almost a part of life in this country. To handle corruption, you need to put up a system, a structure that makes it difficult. In the private sector, they will tell you that an MD cannot approve within this limit. It has to pass through this limit. It has to go through a board. They have to be able. But what we see here, we see the Federal Executive Council going every day to award contracts without even plan.
These rules are there even in the civil service, isn't it?
They are there but they are not in the system. That's what we're talking about, the structure. The structure. Corruptions take advantage of the structure and the system. If you have a strong system, I'll give you an example. Before, it was not easy. It was so easy to perpetrate crime in Nigeria, go away with money, because you open various accounts and you can just move money from point A to point B. Now with the NI, not only the NI, with the BVN, all they need to do, you put all your BVN, it brings out everybody else's account, or where the banks that you are. So those are systems. So it's not more easy for, you can track my funding. How am I getting my fund? How? Why did it move from this bank to this? It's easier to track. That is a system that can keep corruption.
Okay. All right, well, Dr. Tefa, there are quite a number of other issues also that needs attention. Really, like you said, that to achieve this $1 trillion economy, the monetary policy alone cannot do it. Other analysts like you have touched on the issue of security. You've touched on the issue of infrastructure as well, and so on. How can we get this in place, and which should come first, for us to actually realize this goal?
The point I'm making is, yes, CBN monetary policy cannot do it alone, but this is my thesis for this interview. The CBN governor himself, that speech does not show that CBN knows what to do to achieve that, to contribute its maximum quota to achieving that $1 trillion economy. That's the point I'm making. The CBN needs to understand that CBN is about monetary policy, it's about banking sector, and from the banking sector to the other sector of the economy. It's about macroeconomic modeling, understanding macroeconomics. The CBN, the sectors, what needs to be done? Our domestic absorption capacity, which is what he's referring to as other sectors, what other sectors need to do, our production capacity, comes from consumption decision of individuals and investors, comes from investment decision of persons and institutions, comes from government consumption as well. These three components, this consumption, investment, government expenditure, is what determines our domestic absorption capacity. The access to which the impact or the link from CBN's monetary policy to the decision makers in these three building blocks I just mentioned has been weakened over the years. CBN needs to focus on how to restore banking confidence to that consumption aggregate demand component, to investors and to government. Local governments, some people still pay salaries by table. Investors are not responding to macroeconomic signals. Consumers are still not finding Nigerian-made goods to buy. The issue of corruption that came from the NISA incident is CBN overstretching its role in the economy. Anchor's Brewers Program, NISA is also an agricultural component of the CBN. CBN wanting to replicate MDA's activities and be in everywhere. Olayemi Cardoso needs to give a signal that depart from Emefiele's era. I'm saying that this speech looks like that era will continue.
Even though in his statement he has actually said that CBN is going to move away from that.
CBN is going to move away, but he's the CBN governor. The speech did not show how CBN will move away from that. That's the point I'm trying to make. And then there's the external stability aspect, which is the foreign reserve. The CBN did not show how. Remember, our foreign reserve started depleting because of that practice of withdrawing the dollar to defend the naira. What is the policy direction to ensure that we increase dollar inflow without withdrawing from foreign reserve to defend the naira? This speech needs to be more economic, to be more policy oriented. It looks like it's politician talking. The president can say Nigeria would be a $1 trillion economy, but his technical persons, CBN governor, should not be seen. As an institution, CBN is an expert institution. We have friends and colleagues there, economists guys, lawyers, financial experts. But it's important for CBN policy to tell us whether this regime, where we'll be looking at tight monetary policy in the next 1 year, expansion in the next 2 years, what we will be doing, how to deepen financial inclusion. Remember what he said very rightly there. If we keep pushing on recapitalization, we'll swallow small banks, meaning those who are financially underserved will even become even more distant. They will have difficulty to access financial resources. So banks need to be innovative in creating products that the people can access. From the basic thinking is that banks create money from intermediating with deficit spending unit and surplus spending unit. You must push banks to keep lending to people who have to save and carry that saving to give those who need to invest it. Otherwise, if the banking system looks overcrowded and the policy signal is not looking like there's a future or a steady trajectory, people will innovate and go into all these fintech loans and other funds. They will go back to lending from family and friends.
Yes,
I'm saying that this CBN governor's speech is serious, and it's not something, because that's one of his first speech since he became CBN governor that is very official and detailed. Like you said, almost 40 pages. So there's need for CBN to go back to monetary policy committee meetings where they talk as think tank. That monetary policy committee meeting board, there are economists there, the banking sector, organized private sector, everyone is there. CBN governor just talking from his speech to professional associations will not do it. The Nigerian economy needs to be very focused right now.
Okay, Mukhtar, let me throw this question at you. Let's talk about the foreign exchange. It's one of the things that is also attributing to where we are right now, you know, the inflation rate, where there is still no stability on the Naira. The Naira keeps devaluing. I mean, we keep seeing it right there. So one of the things that the CBN governor says is that they will allow the market forces to control this. To control the foreign exchange market. Do you think that is the best solution at this time?
Look, they've already done that, and you can see the repercussion of it, because when you're doing a policy like that, you need to think about your war chest also. When I mean your war chest, your liquidity. No economy in the world leaves its currency to market forces to determine. You don't just leave your economy to your currency to market forces, because market forces will always look for advantageous ways to deal with your currency. If the CBN was liquid enough to say, look, you are not saying you should do direct you should just directly intervene like what you do, 200 million weekly. No. You know that you said the exchange rate is supposed to drive between 700 and 750. Then when you see that the currency is going above that rate, you intervene in the productive sector. You make liquidity available to the autonomous foreign exchange market. That control, that demand and supply, that brings down the exchange rate. So floating of the Naira is not something we are used to. We have been used to manage control. So that's why you are seeing the kind of volatility you're having, and you don't have the liquidity. Now, how do we earn liquidity in the foreign exchange market? Just 4 ways Nigeria earn liquidity in trade, and now mostly trade that we earn liquidity more is in oil and gas, in our crude oil sale, Nigerian diaspora, foreign direct investors, portfolio investors. When you look at these 4 countries, until recently, the crude oil theft reduced our earning. Foreign direct investment is practically non-existent. Portfolio investors are not there. You need to look at the motor on the Nigerian stock market, realize that Nigerian investors that have been driving this market. Remittance from the diaspora, it's not that it used to be, because they are coming out from a COVID-infected economy, and most of them are now not even translating those efforts they used to send directly into the Nigerian banking system. They are now using fintechs, they are now using other means, so the money is not finding its way into the system. Now, what I expect Olayemi Cardoso to be doing is, in this first year, how do we stabilize the exchange rate?
Okay.
That is what you should be driving on. All these policies and policy you are driving, without exchange rate stability, you will not be able to achieve it, because we are talking about the $1 trillion economy because of the exchange rate that have eroded. Bank firms have been eroded by the current exchange rate. That's the challenge. So you need to be thinking of the productive sector. How do you attract investors? You came up with this floating of the Naira. You thought it would attract investors. Rather, it has not attracted investors. It has brought volatility. After the CBN governor's speech, the exchange rate in the parallel market has moved from 150 to 1,200 and something Naira. That shows you that they were waiting for that statement. The statement did not address the COVID, and you see the exchange rate in the parallel market will keep on galloping. Okay. We'll see how the stock market will respond to his speech today, and then you begin to know where the economy is driving.
Well, thank you so much. We have to put an end to the discussion at this point. We look forward to having these discussions again. It's not the end of it in totality, but subsequently engaging with you further. Dr. Tefa Abraham, an economist, and also Mukhtar. He is a financial analyst. Thank you so much indeed for joining us on Daybreak this morning.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.